Welcome to Syndicated Nightmares, where each week we take a deep dive into an episode of Freddy's Nightmares based on the Nightmare on Elm Street film series. Today, hosts Dave and Michelle are joined by Blake Best, co-writer of Behind the Screams, The Dream Masters Revealed. We are covering Do Dreams Bleed, which aired January 7th, 1989, written by Michael De Luca and directed by Dwight Little. Blake and Dave, how are you guys doing?
I'm good.
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, of course. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you for joining us.
Today's episode the synopsis is, a man has dreams that depict information about local killer, the Springwood Chopper. And I think the Springwood Chopper is very reminiscent to the Springwood Slasher, so I wonder if they just couldn't use that.
Yeah, it seemed... So the name Springwood Chopper seemed like an awkward name to me because it made me think of the store Price Chopper, which is a grocery store in New York. And then also it sounds similar to Shopper. So Springwood Chopper just sounded like a pamphlet they would hand out at the grocery store with coupons in
it. I have to say it was weird for me too as well. And as far as the Springwood Slasher is concerned, that was Freddy's moniker when he was alive, when he did his original killing spree. So they probably didn't use that because that's already taken. That was Freddy's, moniker. Was the original 20 killings that he committed from 66 to 71 were called the Springwood Slasher murder. So that's probably why they didn't use that.
Now, the director of this episode also directed Halloween 4. So it's good that in this episode we have someone with some horror knowledge in order to bring that feel back to the episode. Some of the previous episodes didn't really have anyone who was familiar with the horror genre, and I think that it kind of showed in each episode.
And he also did Phantom of the Opera with the Robert Englund one, although that might have been after this.
Yeah, that was the same year. That came out the same year. It was a Menahem Golan production, but yeah, same year. Yeah.
The boy in this episode, John, he was in Ghoulies too, so he is also familiar with the horror genre.
I remember watching that on TV. It aired on a Saturday afternoon. The one with the carnival.
So Blake, what do you remember about this episode starting off?
Well, I like the way it starts. With this sequence where you're not sure at first whether or not this is a dream. As it goes on, because, if you kept in context with the other episodes of the show, Springwood, Ohio is a very precarious kind of place to try to carve out a life for yourself. It's sort of like, I think my buddy Danny Hassel quoted in Nightmare 4, he said, all the towns in America, and I'm moved to the Bermuda Triangle. So I think that's sort of where we're at. We're sort of in, Weirdsville, USA here. So nothing is as it seems in Springwood, and a lot of that is due to Freddy's influence. So I immediately, right off the bat, you're like, is this a dream? Is this real? And then it's really scary, really intense, really dark lighting, and it's very reminiscent of some of the earlier Nightmare on Elm Street films. And then we get the wake-up call, where he wakes up. So then we're obviously at that point sort of just told, oh, this was a dream. But it's a really, really cool way to start an episode. And like you said, Dave, some of those other episodes kind of drift away from the whole nightmarish kind of, creep factor. Some of them are not as scary as others. Some of them, it kind of doesn't really, you can't really find a place where they sort of fit, but this one sort of fits with that whole macabre kind of feel that they were, going for.
In previous episodes, and almost all of them, whenever there's a family dynamic at the core of the story, Dave and I have noticed that a lot of the families are rarely together. They have a very tumultuous relationship, especially between father and son, mother and daughter. And that was also part of the story in this one. John's family, his parents weren't around too much, and his girlfriend's mom, she wasn't around too much either. And it's very reminiscent of a lot of the families in the Elm Street series movies. None of them, are very attentive to their children.
True, and that just goes back to that dichotomy of sort of the disintegration of the American family, and sort of like basically Springwood on the outside is very idyllic, but just below the surface you see this seething sort of rotting cesspool, and that's where Freddy comes in and kind of just basically destroys Springwood's innocence. So that corrupts everyone, all the families, because if you remember, in all the films, the families all had some sort of a really, 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 to use your wording, tumultuous relationship, whether it was an alcoholic father or, a stepfather that wasn't nice, or, a parent had died, or this, that, they were divorced. There was always something like that.
Dave, what was your impression of the beginning of this?
I really liked the opening as well. I thought it was a strong way to start it. He sees somebody chopping with an axe and then slips on a severed head and wakes up in bed, or he slips and then discovers a severed head. It was really it was a very, coming off an episode that didn't seem Freddy-ish or nightmarish at all. It was nice to get back to that. And then I loved his initial dialogue with the mom when he says, like, I want you to come. She's off in Milan, and he says, I want you to see me come play football. And she says, oh, but we've already seen you. I thought that was great.
We already know that you're a good player. We don't have to come see you. So John, unfortunately, has witnessed the Springwood Chopper killing his latest victim, and that is giving him nightmares where he kind of sees it over and over happening again, but he can't see the Springwood Chopper's face. And he finds solace in his football coach, who's trying to like help him through it, and he kind of really seems to care about what John is going through.
Which was a nice change from Lori Petty's coach in the track episode, to have a nice coach versus the awful coach from before.
Oh, very true. Yeah, Blake, do you remember that episode?
I do. Yes, Killer Instinct, I believe is what that was called.
Yes.
Yeah,
and it was sort of nice, to get that different sort of dynamic, as far as that goes, because again, you had just come off of an episode that really wasn't really Freddy heavy. Several of these episodes are not. So it was nice to kind of see, an episode where not only is Freddy more involved, within the episode a little bit more, but also you get the, back to that kind of scary sort of, atmosphere for the beginning of the episode. And then you kind of feel like you can relate to the characters. I mean, I've been there. I was the product of a broken home, so I felt that when I saw him, reaching out to someone, be it someone even his own age, a girlfriend, this kind of thing, try to reach out and get that sort of, company. I guess because misery loves company, and they both understood what each other were going through. So it was nice that they could sort of feed off each other and kind of lift each other up when they were down. That was nice. It makes them feel more real, like you can relate to them. Also helps if you get to feeling a way about a character and then something happens to that character, it impacts you. And I think that's what they were going for when they created this episode.
Yeah, it's very apparent that the girlfriend Ronnie really does love John and is looking out for him. She just wants the best for him.
They had a sweet relationship. A lot of times the relationships in these episodes are really like not healthy, but they seem to have a really nice bond.
Yeah. So the Springwood Chopper, when he's chopping away at his victim, he says it's time to take your medicine. And I don't know if either of you picked up on this, but I got a flashback from Nightmare 6 when Carlos's mom said that it was time to take his medicine.
No, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that's very true. And she's like, maybe I should clean out your ears for you. And then you get Freddy's character, talking to referencing Catherine and Maggie, and it's time to take your medicine. You snooped in Daddy's special work, and all this other kind of stuff. So you sort of get that really kind of twisted view of health and caring for someone, which obviously Freddy doesn't care about anybody. So it's kind of neat to see that sort of reference in itself within this, because that movie did not come out until a year, it didn't go into production until about a year after this episode aired. And then it was released in 1991. So it's kind of neat. Basically, this came first, and then Freddy's Dead kind of, picked up on that and sort of reiterated it to the fans. So that was kind of a sweet thing for them to do.
I got a very strong vibe in this episode of Nightmare 6. I thought John looked very much like John Doe from Nightmare 6, and when we talk later about the episode, I think there's a lot of similarities between this episode and Nightmare 6. But yeah, I thought it was very heavily not influenced by Nightmare 6, because like Blake said, this came out a year before Nightmare 6 was even in production. But Yeah, it was very reminiscent of Nightmare 6, which I kind of appreciated as a fan looking back on it.
Absolutely. Nightmare 6 doesn't get the, Freddy's Dead doesn't get the credit I think that a lot of people should give it, being it was sort of the more offbeat one. But then that was like the basic formula for at least half of Freddy's Nightmares, the television series. It was kind of offbeat. It was sort of weird. And I mean, outside of the 8 episodes that Freddy's a major participant in, he sort of just functions as kind of like the person that almost narrates it, sort of like, I'm going to, use Robert's coinage here, sort of like the Rod Serling from Hell, so you sort of get this narration. He's in and out of the episodes with little anecdotes and little clips, but oftentimes he's not even a major protagonist or part of the episode, but his influence is felt, whether it be directly or indirectly. So I think that's important to be noted,
Was there ever a time while watching the episode that you were trying to figure out who the Springwood Chopper was?
It did seem a little painfully obvious.
Blake, what about you?
Yeah, I sort of, of course, when I saw it the first time, I was very, very young. This was years and years ago. But when I first saw it, I thought either he's crazy, he's experiencing some sort of psychosis, and he really is doing some of this. And he's like seeing himself sort of like that, going back and see, like, and say he was in a blacked out sort of state of, being where he doesn't remember what he did. And there was that option, or it was the other option, which seemed to me to be, fairly obvious, that, spoiler alert for anybody that's listening that hasn't seen it, that the coach was probably the suspect here, probably the one. But yeah, I mean, it was just a toss up between the two. When looking at it again, years later, I definitely see that it is obvious that the coach is, trying to play both sides of the field here. He's trying to be the good guy, but he's really the bad guy, so. And you see that he makes an effort to, like, which we'll get into later. He makes an effort to make John think that this is not what's happening, that it's in his head, or that he, that he doesn't know, or that it's just him, sort of, I guess, being a part of his own, environment, sort of being
I feel like they should have had another character, just have another suspect, like a football buddy or something.
I often went back and forth between, is it the coach who's the Chopper, or is John the Chopper? And he was, like Blake said, just kind of having this psychosis to where he blacked out and didn't know that it was actually him. Yeah, when I was watching it, I went back and forth. I was 90% sure that it was the coach, but also that 10% I was like, maybe it's John.
Yeah, I thought the coach was a little hammy, like are you sure you didn't see his face?
Yeah, that's true. He was very obvious about what his motive was in these counseling sessions. So John, every evening, or I guess every night at 2:15 a.m. starts to have the same reoccurring nightmare, to where he is, I'm not sure if he's sleepwalking or if he's just dreaming that he's going into the basement that eventually turns into the back alley where he witnessed the chopping of the Springwood Chopper.
And what struck me was everyone's so concerned about him having these dreams. Like he's coming to the coach about the dreams. The girlfriend is talking to the coach about the dreams. But it's like, if you stumbled on a serial killer and found a severed head, like, of course you'd be having nightmares after that. It would be weird if you didn't.
Absolutely. And why no one recommended that he go talk to a professional, like, it's just beyond me.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the teachers and the adults that are surrounding these kids think that they are professionals, in their own sort of way, because it just goes back to me. The theory that I have is that everything within the continuity of the series and the canon, they all know about Freddy. They all know what Freddy did. And there's been talk of, people having nightmares about this guy with this razor glove and his red and green striped sweater, and they all remember it too well. So they're trying to just take care of it themselves because they don't want to bring any outsiders in. So an outsider comes in, it's like, this town is polluted with this influence and this evil, and they're not acknowledging that there's a chance he could still be alive. They don't even want to think that. So this is their way of sort of sweeping that under the table or under the rug, for lack of a better term.
So this is one of the few episodes at the beginning the center character, or the focal characters, are also the focal characters in the second half of the episode too.
Yeah, I liked that it was, it was an hour-long episode as opposed to the two halves that most of the other episodes are.
Yeah. John has Ronnie stay the night because he's worried about her. Her mom is out of town on a job interview, and she's alone in the house, and he just has a feeling that the Springwood Chopper is going to attack her for whatever reason. So he has her stay the night at his house since his parents are off somewhere. And he has his 2:15 a.m. nightmare again, and when he wakes up, he and somebody are in fisticuffs.
Yes.
Yeah, well, it's sort of that sort of plays out in the earlier films. So you have a nightmare where you're actively doing something, then you wake up and you're in the throes of something very, very similar. You're coming out of a very lucid nightmare, a very lucid dream, or you're dreaming that you're fighting with somebody, and then when you wake up, it has in fact occurred, or something like that. It sort of gives it that mystique about Nightmare on Elm Street, because up until those films came out, there was not the idea that your dreams could be fatal, that you could die, was not something that people readily acknowledged, because it was just not on anybody's kind of landscape. They didn't see it. They didn't even think of it. That's why, it took them forever to get funding for the first Nightmare, because every studio passed on it because they didn't think it was scary. And turns out they were all wrong. Dreams is obviously.
What a great feeling for Wes Craven too, to cash that check and say, you guys were all wrong. So I'm glad he believed in himself enough to keep pushing for it.
Absolutely.
John wakes up from his nightmare and he's wrestling around on the floor with the coach, and Ronnie is there witnessing it, and it seems like John is the one who's the Springwood Chopper.
See, I was a little confused by it, because it didn't seem ambiguous to me that it seemed pretty straightforward that the coach was the killer, but that the girlfriend didn't really see what was happening, rather than they were trying to make it unclear for the audience. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's
the way that I took it. Yeah, that it was very clear that it was actually the coach who was the Springwood Chopper, but it was Ronnie who was like, I don't remember seeing, she was just very, very confused. Is that the impression you got, Blake?
That is the impression that I got. Very close to that. It's just like it. Again, at certain parts, it becomes painfully obvious that he knows, the coach, right? That I'm referring to. He knows more about the situation than he should. So it's a really well done episode, I think, and it really showcases that uncertainty on both the audience's side, because at certain points, if they weren't familiar with the Nightmare films, even they might be, led to believe that maybe John is the one doing all this, and it's sort of like this out-of-body dreaming experience he has, where he's remembering in his dreams these murders that he has in fact committed while he's awake. Which is plausible. Oftentimes serial killers, that when I studied serial killers in college, it's oftentimes something that they talked about was they would remember later more details about the crimes they committed. They wouldn't remember particulars, but they would remember that they had in fact done something, but not exactly what it was they had done. So I think that was very interesting that they play off on that. But then I also think it's interesting that they play up the character of the coach, because certain points it's really brilliant. He's a red herring and he's the prime suspect all at the same time, and they lead you in two different directions, and they do it really well. I think it was one of the more well done episodes of the series. For a lower budget television series, I think that this was one of the episodes that showcased the abilities and being able to bring together every resource they had to make something impactful and resonate. And here we are, 30 years later, talking about it. So obviously it worked,
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think it has a lot to do with the director having that horror genre experience with Halloween 4. He definitely knew what he was doing in the direction of how the episode went, and having the actors, behave the way that they did. I really appreciated how well this episode played out.
Absolutely.
Even though the villain wasn't Freddy, it still had, a similar vibe, like when you would see when they were concealing the identity and you would just see this shadowy figure with an axe. It worked really well.
Yeah, there was a lot of suspense to this episode.
And I also, this is a little off topic, but I would like to point out that John got to wear the cutoff shirt like Johnny Depp did in Nightmare on Elm Street. So it was Nice to see that style brought back.
It was number 11 instead of number 10.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys by chance watched The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina on Netflix?
Yeah.
Not yet, no.
Blake, you might have noticed this if you're far enough into the episodes. I think it's episode 7, somewhere around there, where one of the main guys is wearing a white football jersey with the number 10 on it, and it's like identical to what Johnny Depp is wearing in Nightmare 1. And he's even laying down on bed and in the bed, and he has headphones on.
Yeah, it's very, very reminiscent of that. I think that they took up that was paying homage to that. I finished that series, by the way, what they had up on Netflix, so I'm eagerly awaiting another part so that I can continue. But yeah, I did notice that being that Nightmare has been a career, for me, most of my professional life, I'm very, very aware of when I see things where there's a Nightmare influence and a particular sequence or a particular, interaction between characters or something like that. You might say it's kind of invaded my life, sort of like Freddy invades Dream, but
I think that happens to a lot of Nightmare on Elm Street fans, the hardcore ones, that I don't think we can go a day without seeing some type of reference to that movie, whether it's intended or not.
Absolutely.
Which isn't, it's not a complaint at all. I appreciate any type of Nightmare reference that I can find it in my daily life.
Definitely.
So so when I was watching it, when I was watching this episode, I started to think, like, isn't anyone curious as how or why the coach is inside the house to stop John from being the Springwood Chopper? It just it seemed very very not believable as to why he would be in the house. And
well, he did look up the address. If you remember in that one sequence, he circled John's name and he had his address listed as Elm Street with the house number. So he had access to that record. So that would make sense as to why he had that. But that's not something it's one of those brief kind of scenes after he has an interaction with John in his office. He pulls open this clipboard or this notebook, and there's a list of students, presumably students' names and addresses, and John's is listed there. And it's quite interesting to note that the house that John lives in was the Blocker's house from the pilot. So he was living in the Blocker's house, so Lieutenant Tim Blocker.
Really?
I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because in my notes I wrote, I'm 99% sure the exterior of the house is the same house from the pilot. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that.
Used in the original films too. In the first film, that exterior shot of the school is in fact William S. Burroughs' school. So that's the same exterior location shot for that school that they used in the original Nightmare on Elm Street. Because if you remember in Nightmare 2, it kind of becomes this more open ranch style type school entrance. You don't see that. But in the first Nightmare, you see those very distinctive doors and those steps leading up to the entrance, and it is in fact the same steps and the same entrance. So,
which is great to be able to look back on that. As in a previous episode, I said to Dave, just to have those winks and nods for the real Nightmare fans or the diehard Nightmare fans to be able to see that that maybe the Fairweather fans just didn't really pick up on. So that's nice that they went the extra mile to include that in some of the episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And it's nice to see that, that reference to basically the house that Freddy built, to paraphrase Bob Shea.
Mm-hmm.
They've always had the respect for Nightmare that it deserved, I think, because Nightmare is what launched that company into high style. And they've always sort of had that respect. So to reference the earlier success with those films and reference some of those key sequences in later, incarnations of the show or, later films, I think is really, really nice. And also very, very good marketing on their end, because people that saw the original will remember those locations when they see the later stuff. And that'll make them want to go back and re-experience that same joy, that same love, and that same, terror that they felt when they saw the original. So I think that's a really wise thing to do.
And
absolutely,
I do love all the trips to Springwood High in this series. It's a it's a fun place to go. I like 80s high school.
So by this part of the episode, John has been taken to a psychiatric ward, kind of discreetly. Only his parents, the coach, and Ronnie know that he's there because they didn't want to make an official arrest. So according to the town, the Springwood Chopper is still out and about.
But he's been dormant for a little while.
A town system with, letting bad guys go.
Right.
You would think that they would work a little harder at that. But I thought that was funny that, this killer's still on loose, and, you got this kid, this student, at school who's seeing something, and people are treating him like he's crazy. But they should really be, sort of investigating in that and sort of looking into it, because obviously they don't have any other leads, because nothing has got it to where the coach has been turned in. There's not even glance of suspicion cast on him, as far as I'm aware, from anybody else in the episode. It's amazing to me the ineptitude of the police force in that universe.
Springwood Police Department, I don't think really earns their paycheck.
Yeah.
Well, to be fair, though, which we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, Razor's Edge, I do, in that novel, I do take the stance that in the beginning they were effective, as much as effective as a town that's never had a serial killer that all of a sudden has a serial killer that's wiping out the population of children, as effective as they can be. But yeah, they've sort of always been inept, and it shows in the films, obviously, especially in Nightmare 3. When you get more of that backstory about Freddy and Lieutenant Thompson, who's now become a security guard, is no longer a lieutenant of the police force. So he's taken one hell of a downgrade to being a security guard at wherever it is he's supposed to be a security guard at. I don't think they ever really say, but yeah, that just speaks to that ineptitude. But yeah, it's rough. We got a killer going loose, but let's not take any opinions from anybody that might have a clue, because we just don't do that.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be any precautions being taken throughout the town. Like, there's no curfew or anything, like the police aren't questioning John all the time just to see if he vaguely remembers anything. They're one key witness, and they just kind of let him go off to school, and that's that.
Yeah, it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough, but again, it speaks to the weirdness of Springwood as a town. And as a place, obviously, because there's no place I've ever been to that would ever have anything like that happening. There'd be a curfew. There'd be people going house to house if they had to. There'd be people questioning left and right. They'd have security and stuff set up at the school, because they're targeting people, or if they think that it may be somebody that witnessed it is going to be a target, they'd be stationing police there just for that. So in that aspect, it's not very much rooted in reality. But again, it is a television series, so it's supposed to be fantastic. Right?
So at this part of the episode, John is in the psychiatric ward, and the episode kind of shifts its attention onto Ronnie. Dave, if you kind of remember any of her interactions with the coach and how the story kind of progresses from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we go to her, and then I guess we were just talking about, throwbacks to the film series, and she's going to school, and it was a little reminiscent of Nancy walking to school in the first one.
I felt the same way.
And her mom is like, well, all men have something to hide, so you found out what his thing is. But yeah, she meets with the coach, and she's just not sure that it's that John's the killer. And the coach is like, well, who else could it be? Of course it's him. And she's just not sure. And so that sort of bleeds into her her not being sure about that just sort of bleeds into the rest of her life and creates nightmares for her. And so she sort of becomes the focus of that part of the episode. And she's the one experiencing nightmares about this Springwood Chopper. And there were some cool sequences, like her house is shaking and the wall comes apart. At one part, the wall comes apart and Freddy's there.
Blake, as a writer, did you pick up on any type of symbolism or foreshadowing, anything with the shaky walls, or was that just something that they threw in because they had the budget for it?
Well, I think obviously they had the budget for it. Of course, when you have the budget, go for it. But I think it was supposed to be symbolic of the line between dreams and reality kind of becoming a sort of a distant off-thought idea, the merging of the waking and dreaming world. I think that was supposed to be what that was, especially the part when the wall breaks down and comes apart, and then Freddy is there, obviously Freddy he walks that fine line between dreams and reality, though he's only powerful really in dreams. The fact that he can affect your waking life, that I think that's an ode to that. That's definitely a nod to that. And then again, I think it's a nod to Nightmare One, where you have that great sequence with Jim Doyle, the one who built the glove. He's standing outside of the wall of the set on these apple crates, and he's pushing his face and claw through this spandex material, which cost about $10 or so, from what Robert has always told everyone. And he's pushing his face through that wall. So that whole idea of the wall coming apart and sort of Freddy sort of being this presence behind the wall or bleeding through the wall is kind of that. I thought that was definitely like a nod to that sequence. And it just makes sense since, we've got the exterior school, shot of the school from Nightmare One in there. And then we've got this whole, thing with the girlfriend Ronnie where she's walking to school, much like Nancy. And then you've got Freddy coming through the wall. And then you've got this whole just feeling of uncertainty about what's happening, what's real. Am I awake? Am I asleep? What's going on? What is this place? You sort of get that whole thing. So it's like almost like it's like it's happening at the same time that Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, is happening, but in a different reality. Sort of.
Blake, I think you are a testament to the saying that true Nightmare fans bleed red and green, because to be able to put the correlation of the shaky wall and the spandex wall together is just brilliant. So I really appreciate those two coming together.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I mean, obviously, I did not coin, obviously, the wall gag. I think that was a really interesting, thing to do. So especially such a lower budget. But yeah, I'm a professional in the industry. I've been a professional for years. But first and foremost, I was a fan before I ever touched a pen or a computer to make this a career. So I always sort of had that love for the films, and I always remembered everything about them because everything about them resonated to me. It elicited a reaction. And this episode is very reactionary. Obviously, as fans of VF films, you guys even saw them, where there's certain parts where it just kind of like brought everything to the forefront. You're like, aha, yeah, I know that looks familiar. That looks like this. That looks like Blocker's house. That looks like this exterior shot from the school. This is like Nancy's situation. This is the correlation that Nightmare fans the world over always put together. And that's why going and doing these conventions, I love meeting when the fans come up to my table and get an autograph and they tell me all these things, and hearing it from all these different people all the time, it really makes me appreciate the film series even more, and what it's done for everyone. Our community is bound together, and we all like to take trips to Elm Street. Obviously it's one hell of a place to visit. So,
of course,
of course, let's take a trip to Elm Street together. And I think that's what makes it so special, especially this series. It was a diamond in the rough for sure. I think there were a lot of great moments, and I'm only sorry it didn't last longer than 2 seasons.
Speaking of taking a trip to Elm Street, that's what John ends up doing in this part of the episode. He breaks out of the psychiatric ward, and Ronnie gets a visit that night from quite a few people. Dave, if you remember this part of the episode.
Yes, she hears his voice and she goes down into the basement, and she has a nightmare about John and her mom. And then when she wakes up, there's the axe murderer chopping through the door, who is the coach. It's sort of like repeats again. John tackles the coach, who's the axe murderer, and kills him. But then Ronnie doesn't know what she saw, and John's, arrested, and they think he's the axe murderer and that he killed the coach.
Yeah, and then is that pretty much how the episode ends, Blake?
That is exactly how the episode ends. She's like, I don't know what I saw, as they're, hauling him out. And I think that just, it's funny because during all this time, Freddy's coming in and out with his little clips. He doesn't like competition. Freddy's very, very selfish. He loves his kid. He loves to kill him. He doesn't want anybody else killing his kid. So obviously he sort of doesn't take well to that. So it's kind of like this sort of on another level, another part of the universe there. We've got Freddy, who's kind of, mad that somebody else is, infringing on his territory. So you sort of get that dichotomy, and it almost becomes comedic in a way, because, you've got Freddy spinning around with his eyes blindfolded, and then you've got him with this axe. And I think it's funny they used a shot of Robert without his glove on, because you can clearly see his wedding ring
I missed that.
Right there with his finger. I was like, I've always meant that I want to let him know next time we do a show together, Robert, you have to review this episode, and I have to tell you, that is a beautiful wedding band you have on there. Especially the fact that you wear that and your glove on the same hand. Your hand must weigh a lot. You must have like a lot of weight on your hand when you're doing these things. That must account for that gunslinger stance you're always talking about, because you have so much weight from that claw, and then you've got your wedding ring and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's sort of how the episode ends. And then, I mean, it's left sort of just unresolved, basically. But that's a lot of things on Elm Street are left unresolved. I think that's the point. The murder of Freddy by the parents didn't get resolved. It made things worse. So I think this is an ode to that. But it's a great episode. I was thrilled to be able to sit down and watch it again, especially having just visited Elm Street myself for the past few months with this book coming out. It was nice to see an older time for Elm Street for me, because I've been focused on Nightmare 4 for so long now. To see something from after that point was kind of refreshing and nice, and it was a great episode. And Freddy wasn't a part of it, but you felt him there, and he's
that's true.
I think it's important.
Dave, we'll get your impression of the episode, and then we'll cut back to Blake, and we can talk more about behind the screams. So, Dave, what did you think about the episode?
Yeah, I thought this was definitely one of the stronger episodes. Even though Freddy's not in it very much, it very much feels like part of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, and it feels like Springwood, and feels like characters that would live there. And having, the whole episode revolve around the same characters, they're a lot more developed, and it's a much stronger story than when they're two basically self-contained halves. So I really like this one.
This is the first episode to come to air in 1989, so I think it was a very strong episode for them to introduce the second half of the first season. So I thought it was a very good choice. So Blake, can you tell us more about your journey with Nightmare on Elm Street 4?
Sure. In 2016, I wrote an origin novel for Freddy, and that's sort of how this all started. The novel was called Razor's Edge, and there was this big petition about it being released, and then all this publicity and all this stuff about, this book's going to come out, this is going to be what fans have wanted. And it was featured on all these sites, a horror freak news, and you name it, it was there. Press all over. There was press in London, there was press across the other parts of the world about it, South Korea, Vietnam. And then the book came out, and it sold, and people really liked it. And then Mick read it. Mick and I were doing a show. We were doing a convention in Las Vegas in 2016. And Mick, as you both know, and as the listeners may or may not know, it was the production designer on Nightmare 3 and Nightmare 4, and he also worked on the first 22 episodes of this series that we're talking about tonight on Freddy's Nightmares. And he was the production designer on that as well. And he read the book and loved it. And, we were both inducted, along with Nick Benson, who was a Nightmare on Elm Street 4 alumni. We were all inducted into the Hall of Horror for contributions to the Nightmare on Elm Street mythology. And it was this big star-studded event, and we were, it was really amazing, because it was when I first realized I wanted to keep writing Elm Street things, because I realized that the love for it never died. And so he came to me, really late one night, in 2017, called me up. It was almost midnight my time, and said, Blake, I want to do a book on Nightmare on Elm Street 4. What do you think about that? I said, well, I think it's a good idea. We've got the 30th anniversary coming up. The film was released in August 19th of 1988. 30th anniversary is coming up, and I think the movie deserves a book, because it was the highest grossing film in the original series until Freddy vs. Jason came out. It was the one that made the most money, and it was one of the more popular ones. It had a great soundtrack, it had great effects. It was all these, jump cuts. It was very stylish. It was very modern for its time, and it aged really well. And I thought about doing, a conversation, it occurred where Mick and I and Nick and we're all hanging out, with Doug Stewart, who was another really good special effects artist. And we were all hanging out, and we were talking about it over some drinks. And I was like, I might want to do a book on Nightmare 4. So I put it aside. I went and wrote a book on the Loch Ness Monster, and, I started doing other things. and screenwriting and all that. And then he called me up, so I dropped the project I was working on, and he said, "What do you think about doing a book with me?" I said, without hesitation, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because I was sleepy, I don't know if it's because I was tired and I'd been traveling. I don't know if it's just because I wanted to get him off the phone because it was late. I don't know why, but I said, sure, let's do it. And then I woke up the next day, and then I was allowed to make the announcement. So I made a little video, and it went viral on Facebook. We're talking, 4, 5, 6,000 shares. And then all of a sudden it became this whole other thing. So people started asking what it was going to be about. We juggled with the title. We weren't sure. So I called him in a panic. I was like, what are we going to call this thing, man? We got to call it something. He said, well, why don't we call it, why don't you give me a few minutes and I'll call you back? I said, okay. So he called me back about 5 or 10 minutes later, and he said, we're going to call it Behind the Screams. The Dream Masters Revealed. First, it was going to be called Behind the Screams and Nightmare on Elm Street 4 Revealed, but we changed it to shorten it because we wanted to focus on the Dream Master being the subtitle for the film, and also the Dream Masters, plural, are the people that made the film. So I was like, I like it. Let's do it. Let's call it that. Let's get this thing going. So 7 months later, this book comes out. We've talked to everybody. We talked with everybody. Robert Englund is a good friend of both of ours, and I've known Robert for close to 21 years. So Robert said, yes, Blake, I will do it. You guys are on board. I'm on board. Let's do it. So we got him to do a section in it. And then Rachel Talalay did the foreword, which was really amazing. She's a good friend of ours. And obviously she worked with Mick quite a lot, on those films because she was involved with all of them except for Nightmare 5. So, we got all those people. And then over the years, I had been doing a podcasting thing where I was a guest that would come on and talk about my books. And I'd also bring Nightmare on Elm Street alumni with me. So I had a few episodes on a podcast where I brought a bunch of the Dream Warriors on, and then several other people. So I was like, let's talk to them, see if they want to do it. So everybody got on board, and Nick Vincent, who I just spoke about, he did a section in it. Bill Force did a section in it. Steve Johnson, who you guys I'm sure all know is the creator of Slimer, he worked on Nightmare 4. He did the big chest of souls sequence at the end where the souls tear out of Freddy's body. So he sat down and did some things. And before you know it, we had over 50 interviews and 7 months of work to come out with this book. And so the book comes out, and it's a smash. People are loving it. Fans are, I'm still, today, before I called you guys, I was still readying up an order. I'm going to mail out books every week. So I'm constantly at the post office mailing out books once or twice a week. And people have loved it. I did a convention in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm a native of Nashville, and I'd never done a convention in my home state. I've only traveled abroad and done them everywhere else. So they booked me, and then I went up there and did the appearance in Knoxville, and I brought some things with me, to help promote the book. The book was on Nightmare 4, and some of the things that I have are very unique and unusual. I have Bill Force's original screen-used stage script with all of the sequences that were cut out of the film, so over 300 pages. He sent it to me. He also provided several pictures to him doing Robert's makeup and working on the set and, doing technical things and all that. And then he sent me the chain link from Tuesday Night's Death Sequence. Robert's hanging on to the chain link, and I believe the line he uses is Elm Street's last brat farewell. And then he says, why don't you reach out and cut someone? And the chain link that he's around right there is the one that I have in my office. I've got it all in a shadow box. And probably I didn't expect the most amazing piece that I was sent was I got home and I checked the mail, and there was a package to me from Bill Force. So I opened it up, and inside this package is the last surviving piece of Robert's Freddy sweater from Nightmare 4. The last piece that made it out of the place before they tore everything down and destroyed it. So
how nice. Wow. What a great piece of memorabilia.
Oh yeah, I take it to all of my shows, and like I said, I've got it boxed up, and it hasn't been out of this bag in probably 20 some odd years. It's frayed, it's coming apart, and I'm afraid to open it because I'm afraid it'll just crumble if I do. So I sealed it up and put it in this envelope, and apparently it's the sequence where Freddy is up against the wall, and all the little souls that are being puppeteered are coming out of him and ripping the sweater. And this is one of the pieces, one of the last pieces, that that was ripped off, and the rest of it was thrown away.
Well, are you able to tell us how we can order a copy of Behind the Screams?
I'm very active on Facebook. I've got a Facebook. It's Blake Best Horror. It's facebook.com/Blake Best Horror. You can order it from that page, or you go to my official website. I've got a great management team that helps me take care of my website. It's blakebestauthor.wixsite.com/Blake Best Horror. And there's a books section, and you can order the book there as well. I am running a special for the holidays, which I thought was important. You know, it's fans have been so. Usually, when I sign a book, it's extra because that's just as part of my management. And then part of everything is the signed books are limited, so that's usually extra. Well, this month I'm doing it where everybody that orders a copy, the $25 copy with the shipping, I sign your book and send it to you at no extra charge. And that's my gift to the fans because they've been so good to me and so good to Robert. And you guys have made me have this great career. I get to go sit down and have lunch with Robert Englund. I get to go hang out with all the people that I grew up loving. I work with them now, and you guys make that possible. You make it possible where I get booked at conventions. You make it where there's always demand for me to be there. I've had film work because of fans. I've had, further book deals inked because of fans. I've always had the respect for the fans because they are the most legitimate, most honest people that I've met in the horror community. I would tell you that the best place to go if you're a fan of horror is go to a horror convention. Meet those.
Oh, absolutely. Horror conventions are one of the greatest places to be for a fan.
They have made my journey on this road to Elm Street definitely, unforgettable. And I will have memories to cherish for the rest of my life because of this. And that's why I've decided to go ahead and continue working in the Elm Street, on the Elm Street side of things and working with those films because the fans respect those. The fans respect what we've done. The fans respect that the genre is part of the way the genre is. A lot of that is, definitely due to Nightmare on Elm Street, with the slashers and he's, one of the tops. I mean, there's Jason, there's Michael, there's Leatherface, there's Pinhead, there's all these, and they're great, notable, but for whatever reason, Freddy is just top of the line for most people. I think it's because he has personality. He likes to toy with you before you die,
That's very true. Okay, Blake, well, I want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. It's been an absolute pleasure to share this episode with you.
Well, thank you both very much for having me, and I look forward to if you guys ever decide to have me back on, I'd be more than happy to come back and I'll work with my schedule to make it happen because you guys were really, really great. You helped me, you allowed me to work around my schedule to still make sure I could be a part, and you worked with me, and I appreciate that. And you've been really nice, and you're definitely big fans, and I can tell. And we all appreciate that. All of us, Nick, myself, Robert Englund, all of us in the Nightmare camp appreciate what you guys are doing and appreciate your love for it.
Dave, do you have anything for our segment into the next episode?
Thank you so much for joining us for this episode. Please join us next week when we talk about Season 1, Episode 12, The End of the World, where James Bond and Gumby guest star.